on. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. We are studying, this is our Bible study. We're studying in the 12th chapter of Luke. We're going to cover the story or the account, the parable of the rich fool today. And we're looking forward to it. The fire, I think, is going behind me. My right hand's about to freeze off. It's the farthest from, must be the farthest from my heart and from the fire. But anyway, I got on my Mr. Rogers shirt. The fire's going. I managed to make it out here to the studio in order to do this thing. And we're looking forward to talking with you. You can get through to us right away, as you know, on this program. I'm about to dial in on my phone so that you can call us on chat. And we're going to look forward to talking with you. As soon as I figure out how to do this, I am. Since I can hardly think and walk and chew gum at the same time, that may be somewhat problematic. But we look forward to your joining us. You can do that on chat here on this YouTube feature. But since I can hardly think and walk and chew gum at the same time, that may be somewhat problematic.
Did he bring up real?
Everybody decided to talk to me, said that, including this thing. How do you kill that? It never has talked to me before, Dave. Excuse me, Pancho. Pancho doesn't like his real name to be used. Anyway, you can get hold of me on chat. And my wife can get hold of me on the phone asking about somebody named Humphrey. And you can reach us on the telephone too at 31 here locally at 317-257-3000. 317-257-3000. Or if you're out of the calling area, at 1-800-423-2484. What was that thing doing, Dave? Anyway, we're looking forward to talking with you. We are going to talk. Let's read it here, and we'll go from there. Hopefully that fire will begin to churn up any moment now and actually produce some heat. I probably should have put a whole lot in this particular building. I probably should have put a whole lot more insulation so that it would quit fooling around back there. But we're in Luke 12. We're going to start in verse 13 today. Let's start reading there. One of the company said unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. All of these things just prove that we actually are live, as you can tell by the goofy things we do occasionally. He said unto him, Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? He said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. He spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. He thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? And he said, This will I do. I'll pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, neither for the body, what ye shall put on. The life is more than meat, and the body is more than raiment. Okay, we want to talk about this account of the rich fool. One fellow has labeled this as egotism rebuked. This was just a foolish, sort of unwarranted question being asked of the Lord. And the few words that he spoke revealed a sort of an egotism, incapable of caring about anything but his own selfishness. My goodness, can you imagine? Can you imagine listening to the Lord preaching to you the gospel about your salvation, and you're trying to get him involved in a dispute with your brother? Several things I want to talk about with you about this. Some of the operative passages in the law that pertain to this notion of inheritance a little bit. If I can figure out how to run my computer, which is always questionable. Deuteronomy 21. Here, if a man have two wives, one beloved and another hated, and they've borne him children, both the beloved and the hated, and if the firstborn son be hers that was hated, and so on it goes. You can imagine the tremendous amount of controversy among these Jews over this law of inheritance, this law of primogeniture. So that the Jews actually had courts for deciding all these things. And usually when they dealt with this, they would call the oldest child, of course, called the firstborn, and then the younger children were called just simply simple. I don't think that was because they were simple, but that was just the name for them. In this particular case, there were only two children involved, and usually in this case, where there were, for instance, if they inherited a situation where they were inheriting an animal, then you had to figure out that the formula was apparently they called the court of thou draw and I'll draw. That was sort of the name for it. I'm not giving you the Hebrew, of course, where the one of them had to pay the other one for the half of the animal or the servant or the property that they didn't actually want to divide. So that they would say to one, you draw, that is, you pay me, or I'll draw, or something like that. In other words, redeem your share, or I'll redeem mine. And in that division, you can see there was an awful lot of room and possibility for quarrels and difficulties, so that the Jews, as they talked about these controversies, they said that they would, a lot of times they'd argue about the quality of the sons. For instance, if the younger son was a disciple of a wise man, or if the elder was not, and if the younger was made a proselyte and the elder was a Gentile, and it would go on and on and on, and they just had tremendous courts deciding these. Now, the judges who would decide the case that this man was presenting Jesus with was called the bench of the triumvirate. And these were judges that decreed about dividing, and they would have decided this. Why in the world this man appealed to Jesus to decide it? The likelihood, I suspect, is that both this man and his brother were disciples of Jesus, and they were probably both in the crowd or the group where Jesus was at this time. The young man or I'm assuming the younger man, I don't know whether younger or older, had gestured toward his brother, and they both were perhaps disciples of Jesus, and therefore they were appealing to him to decide it, so they didn't have to go to the judges. But there were courts appointed just for this purpose, and that's what Jesus says. Jesus says, who made me a judge and a divider over you? Where did I become the one who decides these things? There are courts for that if you can't agree on it. Jesus makes a statement in John 18, and this is sort of a good example of the truth of that statement. Jesus makes the statement, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then I would be a judge and a divider over you. That's, of course, not what he says in John 18, but it's the same idea that is borne out there. In Luke 10, Jesus instructs the Jews to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar. And so this is Caesar's area that these brothers are arguing about. And so he said, don't make me a judge, don't make me a divider. And you can imagine, locally here, there was an old man who was here, sort of famous in this part of Indianapolis for a while. At least those of us who went to auctions, he was an auctioneer. And he begged, he spoke one day. I was at the auction, and he spoke and he said, please write a will. He says he had seen so many cases. You know, I don't know why he wasn't selling, but he took a moment to do a little preaching. He said he had seen so many cases where a family where they died, the parents died or whatever, without a will, and left the children, and they got into an argument and disagreements about who got this stuff and who got that stuff and who got this money and who got that money, to the point that it divided the family and ruined the family. And he said, please take care of that. So you can imagine that the same thing pertained among these Jews. And Jesus, this just wasn't his bailiwick. That was the things of Caesar. And he, as I said earlier, his kingdom was not of this world. It is one interesting point. Well, I'll move on. You don't need to know. I don't need to tell you every little move that exists. Let's go on to verse, where do I want to go? Verse 16, which if I'll get my Bible open here, I can actually see verse 16. He says, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. Now, this was sort of the way they referred to it. They would refer to their ground, which would refer to their farm, if you will. This word, he brought forth plentifully. I haven't told you this all the time because they're really, it probably would get tedious after a while. But, you know, when we first started studying Luke, I tried to tell you as often as I could the uniqueness of Luke and the proofs of him. And this is one of those words. This is a medical term that's used here in the medical writers, and in the word also appears in Josephus, but this is the only place it's used in the New Testament, and it's used by Luke. So here's another medical term being used by Luke, who was, as you know, a physician, and so proof again of his authorship of this and his situation. It's fairly obvious, I think, and I've seen two or three of the people who comment on this particular parable, that the Lord almost certainly, well, excuse me, I shouldn't say that, but it seems obvious to me that he draws this from the account of Nabal in the Old Testament. The account is in 1 Samuel 25, where you have Nabal, who, and you should be familiar with it. I'm not going to take the time to go back and rehash it with you too much, but Nabal, a very wealthy man. David, this was during the period of time when David was fleeing for his life, but they had protected Nabal's herdsmen and crops, and now it was harvest time. He was shearing his sheep, and it was a good time, and Nabal's had been successful, and they had protected him, and David appeals to him to give him some supplies and provisions out of his largesse during this good time. and Nabal refuses and abuses David and so forth. And the word Nabal means fool, by the way, in the Old Testament. And so it seems almost certain that this account is drawn to some extent, or is very similar to the points and lessons being used back over there. The crime in both cases was greed and selfishness and a lack of generosity, a self-admiring position in life that you need to consider. In Proverbs 1 and verse 32. And I want to mention this because here this word simple is again. The turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. So here Nabal was, and here this man, this rich fool in the New Testament, and their prosperity destroyed them. They simply didn't know how to deal with it. He says, "What shall I do? What shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits." It'd been such a successful year that he didn't know what he was going to do. How in the world do I deal with this tremendous success that I've enjoyed? Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10 says, "He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase." And I think we find that true. You know, I've seen a lot of people say, "Well, you know, if I just had $10,000, I'd be happy then." Well, eventually you get that 10,000, you discover, boy, that doesn't go very far. I thought it was a lot of money back when I was a kid, but now it's not very much. So if I just had $50,000, well, most of us here in the United States over the course of time will eventually have a home, and we'll eventually sort of get it paid off. And lo and behold, we'll have property, a car and a house and so forth. And it might be where we might be able to scrape together $50,000 for it. I'm talking to the phone instead of you. I'm looking for this phone to ring for you to get involved in our discussion. And I'm talking to myself too, which is another one of my bad habits, pardon me. But it was obvious it wasn't enough. So the point usually made in comparing this to Nabal is he says, "I have no room where to bestow my fruits." And then in verse 18, "This will I do, I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods." The point of Nabal is in 1 Samuel 25, is Nabal says, "Shall I take my bread and my water and my flesh that I've killed for my shearers," his sheep shearers? That repeated use of the selfish sort of my. And here you see the same thing. My barns, I will tear down my barns so that I can bestow my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, it was sort of a natural way for the Lord to present this, and it does fairly clearly emphasize, I think, the selfishness that was also true of Nabal back over there in 1 Samuel 25. You have a very selfish man who was only concerned about his own things. And he says, I will pull down my barns. Now, the word here is not, you and I think of a barn, and it's a good enough expression, but the word was a granary, or a storehouse that's used repeatedly in the New Testament. But anyway, and I pointed this out several. I used to have I preached at a church before years ago as I began to, and I had this old hard-headed Kentuckian there, and I pointed out it to him several times. that the word corn in the King James didn't mean corn the way he understood it. He thought of corn as what a lot of people refer to as Indian corn or maize, all of that stuff that grows as high as an elephant's eye here in the good old U.S. of A. that was originated here in the United States, maize, and then now it's spread all over the world. But at that time in Palestine, they didn't know about that kind of corn. And so the word would better be grain. It would, the word corn does convey the idea of grain, but you have to really make that association in the King James if you're used to raising maize. Things like wheat and barley and things like that, rye, not necessarily maize. And he goes on to say, he says, I have much goods. I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat and drink, and be merry. Now, let's think about that just a little bit. This is, you know, I've been studying on Wednesday nights in Acts. And we've been studying about, we were in Acts 17 just recently, and we were studying about the Epicureans and the Stoics. And one of the things about the Epicureans is Jesus speaks of him speaking to himself. He's talking to himself in this. And he speaks to his own soul. And he says, I will say to myself, and I'll say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. It's an Epicurean sort of statement. He says, take thine ease, eat, drink, be merry. Shows a sort of an eagerness to his thoughts. Now there is an area of expression in this I want you to see. That is not conveyed particularly well in the English, but it's conveyed in the Greek. There's a difference in the tenses. He says, in English, in the King James, it says, take thine ease. But in fact, the phrase is keep on resting. You know, you don't need to worry now. Keep on resting. And in he says eat. The idea is eat at once. And then the next phrase is drink, which is drink thy fill. In other words, it's not just saying, you know, take a sip of water, but it's eat at once. You don't have to be on a diet. You can just fill up. You don't have to show any restraint. And drink your fill. And then the last phrase, and be merry, is keep on being merry. So there's a distinction, some distinctions in the tenses in those words, but all of them convey a tremendous egotism on the part of this man. One comment made about verse 18 that we might make is that he says, in verse 18, he says, he speaks of all of his goods, my goods. I'm reminded in Luke 16 and verse 25, where in the case of the rich man and Lazarus, Abraham speaks to the rich man and says, son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivedst thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted and thou art tormented. And so he was speaking of all his good things that he could keep on and continue enjoying. Let's go on. there's two or three other passages I want to. I may be having trouble keeping up here with my notes. Proverbs 27 and verse 1. If you've got a chance, you might make a note of this, or you might remember it and look over there. Again, if I can figure out how to work my computer. Proverbs 27 verse 1 says, "Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day shall bring forth." He says that you're taken care of, laid up for many years. We need to be careful of that. There's a lot of warnings like that that we see in the scriptures. First Corinthians 15 verse 32, and I commented about this again in our sermon last Sunday, that 1 Corinthians 15:32 is basically a quote from a Roman or Greek philosopher. So Paul says, "If after the manner of men I fought with beasts at Ephesus, what advantageth me if the dead rise not? Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." That's the same philosophy. Here's a man who doesn't perceive he's going to be happy for many years. He's snatching pleasure while he can. You want to eat, you want to drink your fill, and you want to be merry, or keep on being merry, because you've got several years taken care of, and you want to use all of that you can. Now, this whole scene, this particular parable, seems to have had a profound effect on James, because James refers to the themes of this over and over again in his letter. Look with me in James 4 verse 13. "Go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we will go into such a city and continue there a year, and buy and sell and get gain. Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow." I'm going to shift a little bit here, try to. "You know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanishes away. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall do this or that. But now ye rejoice in your boastings. All such rejoicing is evil. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it's sin." And we try that in the good old US of A really hard. We want to see if I've got enough money. I see this on the news feeds all the time. How much money is it going to take for you to retire, for you to take your ease and eat and drink and be merry? And I understand that we want to provide for the future, and we want sort of a cushion so that maybe we don't have to, at 90 years old, work like a plow mule. But at the same time, doesn't our life consist of more than that? Not once does this man ever consider helping anybody else. Not once does he consider the Lord's statements that we should work with our hands so that we may have to give to him that hath need. Not once does he say that. Everything is about himself. It's all egotism. I mentioned to you James. It had a big effect on James. You might also look at chapter 5 verse 1. "Go to now, ye rich men, reap and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered. They shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You've eat treasure together for the last days." And that wasn't the treasure that you needed to be placing. And in Ecclesiastes, the 11th chapter, verse 9, "Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth." There's a time to be considerate and thoughtful. "Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, that the heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and in the ways of thine heart." I got things in the way. "In the sight of thine eyes, but know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment." The Lord wants you to be happy. Being young and prosperous and successful is Time. What am I out of time? What are you signaling? I am. My watch says I've got 4 or 5 minutes. Quit your pushing, Poncho. One. Okay. I'll hurry up. We'll get this done. There's one other interesting thing in this, and that's in verse 20. God said unto thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Now that's not exactly what it says. Let me look at a revised version, see if they're going to help us any on that. That's verse 20. Come on, quit fooling around up here, computer. Oh, you're going to be difficult. Let's see if I can get up there. I've asked the powers that be to make this easy. No, they don't reflect. The interesting part of this is that it says, they demanded thy soul of thee. That's actually what this verse says. They demanded thy soul of thee. And the question is, who's they? It's a sort of an impersonal plural. Who's they? There are some who say, well, it's the death angel. I'm not too good about that. But some suggest that maybe he was robbed or whatever. But my guess is that it's the Jews did not like to say God. To avoid saying God, they would use the plural, this indefinite plural, they. They do it several times in the scriptures. And this may be another one of those times where they use that sort of indefinite plural as a way of referring to God. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will you get what you have prepared for yours? Who will get what you prepared for yourself? I'm reading out of the NIV in that particular instance. Well, Poncho was over there saying we got to wind it up. I think he's just anxious to go myself. But it's been good to be with you today. You can reach us anytime. We're going to be back on tonight at 7 o'clock on the regular Prove All Things program. We depend on your questions and comments. So we'd like to have you commenting, participating with us. You can reach us at 257-3000, area code 317-257-3000, or 1-800-423-2484, or at Prove All Things at Comcast.net, any of those, and you'll get right through to us. Lord willing, we'll be back on this program, studying back in Luke on Thursday. We'll be at the High School Road Church of Christ, who brings you this program. High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis. And it's been good to be with you. If the Lord wills, we'll be together again tonight. Good evening to you.